Most of you will recognise me, and nice to see some new faces in the room. And I'm very happy to introduce the next speaker, who is Thomas Reynaert, who is our new Senior Vice President for External Affairs. This is Thomas's first Global Media Day, but by no means his first rodeo in this industry. Many of you will remember his spell in charge of Airlines for Europe, so he has a long experience in our industry, and he's going to talk a bit on regulatory and industry affairs. Thank you, Thomas, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. Good morning, everyone. Not to panic, lunch is almost there, so bear with me. Thanks, Marie, for, I think we can really get started with a rather technical presentation, but it ended up as a very lively discussion, so thanks for that. Indeed, very happy to be here this morning. I do realize that both Marie and Willie really set the scene on a number of topics earlier this morning. So again, bear with me. We'll try not to be too duplicative. Let's start where we have to start. As you all know in this room, airlines really want to expand and invest in routes and frequencies and to get more people flying. And I think it's a very good thing, especially if you look at the numbers. You know, more than 86 million jobs being created in aviation, more than $4 trillion of GDP. That's still very, very impressive. But airlines, as you can see from this slide, they don't operate in an empty space. They don't operate in a vacuum. And as we often say in IATA, it really takes a village to get an airline network really up and running. And there are various barriers, as you, I think, all know. So what I wanted to talk today is a little bit of sort of more the political focus on topics, also really talk to a large extent. I really want to talk about basically two elements of regulations and fiscal policy. One is the consumer regulation, and the other is aviation taxes. Both of these have the potential to, I would say, really support aviation or to hinder aviation connectivity and competitiveness. Let's start with consumer regulation. Airlines are really consumer-focused business, and I really felt this when I came back to IATA. I spent a couple of years in IT in a B2B environment, and then come back to the airlines. Oh boy, this is really B2C again. So, but that's a great thing. It's a great place to be at. But it also really means that when passengers aren't really happy with the service, satisfied with their experience for whatever reason, they will take their business elsewhere. We're a very highly competitive market. And so, if you look at it, how a regulator should look at it is when you want to encourage innovation and stimulate competitiveness, you need global regulations. We're a global business, but regulation should be proportionate and really should be as harmonized as possible across the board. And that's, by the way, as we all know, that is and was the objective of ICAO. In line with that goal, by the way, ICAO a decade ago roughly set a number of core principles on consumer protection. This is how we refer to it, and we have these member states, 193 member states agreed on these core principles a long time ago. And these core principles are really good because they're really there to balance two things. On the one hand, passengers need to be protected, which is a good thing. I think that's what we all want. But what we also want is, on the other hand, the ability for airlines to offer choice and value and to be able to operate operationally business-wise in a proper way. So that's also good for the passengers. Now, if governments really aligned with these principles, and I think you know where this is going, but if they're really aligned with these principles, it would really encourage consistency across borders, globally, and really enhance the passengers' confidence in the aviation system. But as you rightly guess, you know, this is unfortunately not happening in many countries. So what does the passenger really expect from us? The last few years, IATA has done some polling with passengers in 15 markets, mature markets, really worldwide, twice a year on a variety of issues. And what you see here in terms of what really passengers are expecting from a flight, it needs to be safe, the flight affordable, sustainable, and reduce delays. So obviously, Delays and cancellations, of course, can be really painful for passengers. But really what comes from the whole is you clearly see the affordability is the second most important priority for passengers. And then in this context of passenger rights, what I want to discuss is they want to make sure that airlines reduce delays or avoid cancellations as much as possible. Importantly for the consumer protection debate, it's notable that it's on the slide, 97% of the passengers were actually satisfied with their most recent flight. 72% of the passengers are confident that they will be treated fairly if the flight is delayed or cancelled. And also note the final point actually on the cabin bags. There's been a lot of discussions in the context of EU261 in Europe and also in Brazil on regulators trying to push to get free or additional free cabin bags on board and want to make that compulsory. But if you see that only 30% of the passengers, when asked, would you be ready to pay for an extra bag? Only 30% of the passengers actually yes, I'm happy to pay for cabin luggage or an extra cabin luggage. So basically that shows you that the overall majority of the travelers either choose an airline where the cabin luggage is included in the price, there's many of them out there, or if it's not the case, they really don't want to pay for the bag. So this is an example, if you look at the European regulation, Brazilian regulation, is there where the regulator is actually interfering something which should be the free choice of the consumer and should be the free choice of the airline with regards to its commercial practices. And it's actually not helping either through these regulations. Now, of course, I mentioned the beast EU261, we actually have to talk about EU261. So let's review some of the consumer regulations around the world. First, EU261. This is really taking us back in what we call a reverse Robin Hood, because you end up with a regulation that is making flying more expensive, and it's actually, you're taking 99% of the passengers roughly, you make them pay for something they don't really want this for. Hence, the great cartoon is one of my colleagues who invented it, who is at the back of the room, the reverse Robin Hood effect, which is a great cartoon. So it's a bit more, I think, a little bit more relaxed. I think, Marie, than your presentation. It's not about hard numbers, but we've got Robin Hood there, so that's great. It really, so it fails, EU261 fails as an incentive to improve airline performance, because the reasons for delays are often not in the airline's control. So that's the sad thing with EU261, it's kind of a regulation that actually has grown beyond what originally is supposed to do. The original objective of EU261 was to really focus on a more proportionate regulation that focuses on what passengers really want, i.e. care, not necessarily compensation for a case of delays. Now, where are we in the context of EU261? I think many of you in the room, if you are based in Europe, know there is a legislative process going on. Earlier this year, the European Commission proposed a revision, so a new proposal on EU261. We, IATA and our partners also in Brussels, had a long time fought for this revision, so finally it's there. And we must say we liked the European Commission proposal because it was very realistic. And the European Commission had clearly listened to us on what's doable, what's not doable, and really trying to find a balance between passenger care, passenger rights, and the airline's operation, and from a realistic perspective. Now, the June, how this goes is that the European Council then provided its amendments and came up with we would say, pragmatic position, restoring the balance, and which is in line with Europe's stated priority to improve competitiveness. The Council agreement for us wasn't and isn't really perfect, but it's something we could certainly live with. But then comes the European Parliament. Surprise, surprise, the European Parliament today, which is very different than the European Parliament for the previous European Parliament, I'd say politically speaking. They proposed a whole series of amendments that made EU261 actually much worse, and actually bringing us back, not only back in terms of threshold to the old regulation, but it's actually making it much worse in terms of the bags policy, extraordinary circumstances, which is now going to be for the Parliament amended to be a closed list of extraordinary circumstances, so no exceptions, whatever happens, this is the rule. And I think you have more details in the notes as well. In short, the Parliament's demands, if you look at it, first of all, they don't respond to the consumer demands. If you think about the options, or basically analysis I referred to in the slide earlier, it doesn't reflect the complexities of the airline operation. The threshold of 3 hours is way too short in many, many cases for the airline to recuperate the crew, to get a new aircraft, and to bring within 3 hours before compensation deadline hits in to the point of departure. And important, the amendments of the European Parliament have not been subject to an impact assessment. Of course not, otherwise they wouldn't have come forward with these proposals. So we really call on the European Council to stand firm on its original proposal, and this is a message we have brought together with our friends also in Brussels from the airline community. We're forming a very strong industry line here in favor of the Council position. Again, so what do ATC delays have to do with this whole thing? Well, it's exactly that. So this is really a show that when we talk about passenger rights regulation, if you see where the delays are coming from, well, you know, let's be honest, and I really alluded to again this morning, no, he actually said it again this morning, and we brought out a study, which is actually a report, which has actually shown that for the last 10 years, ATFM delays, basically ATC delays, have more than doubled for the past year, with a growth of less than 7% of growth of flights. So that's a real endemic problem. You know, I've been away from the aviation sector a while, and sort of coming back was with a double feeling. It felt like coming home again, and I really missed this industry. But also when I was looking, so what about CES 2 Plus? Oh, really, nothing has changed, really. You know, and so there's a number of so the way ATC is run in Europe is just it's just scandalous. It's not working for the reasons really mentioned again this morning. So again, I'm just putting up this slide just to show that good regulation, say EU 261 in this case, it really works when it creates the right incentives for the regulated entity, i.e. the airlines, to do something about it. And certainly if it is within our control. But an incentive or a deterrent, you know, the carrot or the stick, only works if the party is being regulated and we can actually control the problem. Now, ATC, we don't control the challenge. And so with that, unfortunately, EU 261 really fails the whole point on delays, because it only regulates the airlines and it's not taking into account this ecosystem I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation. So with regard to ATC, Single European Sky in Europe, CES 2 Plus, wherever you may call it, I was in another meeting last week with the European Commission and the network manager. They're trying to sort of patch up things, but they're not really trying to help the fundamental problem. And it's really the way ATCOs and ANSPs, how they operate. They operate very inefficiently. So it's up to the European politicians to really focus their attention on this bottleneck. It's about ATC performance, it's about punctuality and resilience. And as long as they don't do that, we will continue to have problems with regards to discussion files like EU 261. Okay, enough on EU 261. I did say I was going to cover bits and pieces of the world. Well, let's take two very different approaches in the Americas. The US, take the US, the consumer rights situation in Washington, D.C. Well, the US government decided to withdraw a proposed rule on passenger compensation on the one hand, and also because they realized it would certainly help with sort of the flat growth in the domestic market that we've recently seen in the US. So we welcome this decision certainly. On the other hand, while Brazil, the Brazilian government is trying to attract more airlines, more competition, including the LCCs in the domestic market, we see that on the other hand, the same government, the parliament, to be fair, are actually introducing a passenger rights bill that has been proposed and that is currently with the Senate in Brazil, and which will actually do some of the bad things that I mentioned under EU 261 before. So basically, this sounds what's happening in Brazil is kind of a re-regulation of what airlines can offer passengers. It takes us actually back to the old days that the happy few were able to travel, because it will make traveling, it will make the connectivity more expensive. It may potentially also lead to cancelling routes in the domestic market in Brazil. So not a good idea. We're watching these very closely, as you can imagine. So just to conclude on the principles, the way we see clear principles for consumer regulation is, first of all, we're not against consumer regulation. I mean, how could we? You know, we need to take care of our passengers in the best way possible, but we need regulators that are more realistic, that actually have more sense of how airline operations work, so that they can take a more balanced and proportionate approach, create positive incentives rather than simply punishments. Again, the stick or the carrot. I think you see the same in the SAP mandate debate in Europe and some of the other countries, and focus on what really matters to passengers. I mean, if you think about this, a parliament, be it in Brussels or in Brazil, think about, oh, we're going to do a right thing for passengers. Do they really know? So my view is no, they actually have not listened to passengers, what the majority of the passengers really want. And that's actually very strange things for people who should be listening to the voters, rather than think about their own careers for the next couple of years or when elections are coming up. And let's not forget, competition is making flying more affordable. We've seen it in many of the markets. We'd like to see more of those markets, but you look at North America, if you look at Europe, it's been a great success. Satisfaction is really very high, satisfaction amongst passengers. So regulation should be laser focused on delivering what passengers want, and even more affordability and better punctuality. Then, let's move to taxes. I did say I was going to cover the tax angle as well. Let's start with corporate taxes versus then the specific and passenger taxes, which I will discuss in a minute. The Chicago Convention, like many of you know, really has designated ICAO as the only competent authority over international civil aviation matters. That's fine. Now, that same ICAO has, with its 193 members, decided that discriminatory taxes should be avoided. Double taxation on air transport should be out of the question. That's a very important principle we really stick to, and it's been again on the agenda at the ICAO Assembly back in earlier this year, in this autumn. But we see that the ICAO authority and the substance of its regulations in the context of corporate taxation is actually being challenged. We are increasingly seeing fragmentation of governance over international aviation corporate taxation, which is of course a great concern. An example is here the debate. Some of you may be familiar with the debate between resident and source state-based taxation for decades, and which has been a very good thing for many governments. International airlines have been taxed in their home country on all of the profit derived from all of the international air transport. What you see now is that outside of ICAO, because that's the whole point, different UN bodies have proposed to the states that they can choose to tax aviation on the profit accrued in each state. So that's kind of more the source state approach, obviously completely against the ICAO principle. And you see that it's actually quite staggering that at the UN level, some of these seem to be living in a silo, as if ICAO was non-existent. So this is absolutely unacceptable. That for the UN's sake, they already have quite a challenge in defending their reputation towards certain governments, and now they're actually having conflicts amongst each other. In this case, on the airline corporate taxation. Great, good. Passenger taxes. Again, was briefly mentioned this morning. In 24, so last year, we had an estimated total of passenger taxes or specific taxes of more than $60 billion were paid worldwide. Now, that may not say much, $60 billion in that sense. So what does this mean? That's the equivalent to an average of almost $30 American dollars for a round trip that you're actually paying on average on all types of flights worldwide. That's about 7.5% of the cost of a round trip ticket. That's not little. I mean, 7.5% is quite high in my view. Taxation, as you all know, it reduces affordability, negatively impacts demand, and dampens the wider economic benefits of air connectivity. And this is why it's very interesting to move to some of the national developments, again, briefly mentioned this morning, but just to put things into context, Netherlands, I live in Brussels, so I'm very close to what's happening in the Netherlands and the whole political mess now. I shouldn't be saying too much because I'm Belgian myself. The situation from a sort of political stability perspective is not much better in Belgium, but we're getting there. So why am I mentioning these countries again is because the Netherlands and Belgium have decided as of 27 to increase the taxes. Not a very good idea. Belgium has done that in the context of, but to Marie's point, it's not an efficient tax, but still they have done this in the context of the budget deficit discussions. Huge deal. It took them months to come to a budget agreement. And of course, again, they are targeting the aviation in this sense. Now, it's not all bad news, I would say. Germany, which has been notorious for its high taxes, not the highest, because the winner is there. How could I forget APD in the UK? So that is going up with inflation. But Germany has decided, and their tax includes a number of charges and fees and so on, related to security related as well, but it is a passenger tax. So they decided to remain flat. And I think the rationale is here, I think similar to the Swedish one, where the Swedes completely abolished aviation tax. And looking to Marie, I mean, Sweden or Scandinavian countries, but certainly Sweden is not known as the most tax-friendly country. So why does Sweden abolish the passenger tax? Well, because they did realize Sweden, well, they actually haven't recuperated the growth or the level of aviation business since COVID, so they haven't recovered yet. So then someone smart in the Swedish government says, oh, there's something wrong here. What can we do in order not to prevent further growth and go back to COVID and actually do better than COVID times? Well, let's abolish the passenger tax, amongst other things, of course. But I think this is really a telling example. And I think the same for Germany. So Germany is doing it not to please the airlines. Germany is clearly doing this for economic reasons. There's a whole bunch of measures that this new German government has taken to stimulate the economy, and this is one of the points that are on the table. So I think just to say that a passenger tax is not a fiscal opportunity, I'm sure Marie will agree with this, but it's a connectivity risk, and if you create connectivity, loss of connectivity, routes being diminished, then you do have a serious impact on your economy. And of course, there are also other countries. I just mentioned these couple of, I would say, telling examples of passenger taxes, increases, abolishments, and keeping flat. But there's also in developing nations, we have taxes such as in Kenya, Gabon, Djibouti, Argentina, Mexico, of course. And the list is still too long, so I won't enter into too much detail. Taxation does not have public support. This is also clear what we've seen from research. They don't have public support. People don't understand why aviation is taxed with the block tax, with the passenger tax. The consensus is quite clear here. 81% believe there are too many taxes on flying. 78% and 72% of passengers, respectively, regard taxes on frequent flyers and premium class flyers. They think it's unfair. And 76% there agree that taxation is not the way to make aviation sustainable. So we've heard also with his comments this morning, it doesn't change anything with regards to the way tax are being proposed, with regards to it's not going to reduce CO2 emissions. These aircraft will still take off. Even if they have a smaller load factor, they will still fly with the same emissions. So our message to government is simple: passenger taxes are unpopular and counterproductive, and governments should think twice before they introduce or increase further passenger taxes. Instead of imposing taxes, there are ways to boost aviation connectivity and to grow our economy, and there are many examples, good examples, to look at that. So I'd say incentivization rather than the stick, and then we'll create a much better framework in the future for the airlines going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. Yes, absolutely. Yes, thank you. So we've got time for some questions before lunch. So does anyone have any immediate questions? Yes, Ian at the front.
Yes, Ian Taylor from Travel Weekly. Thomas, I've got to ask you about that last slide and the more than, showing more than 70% of air passengers as opposed to taxis on frequent flyers and premium class flyers. I'm assuming that's from an IATA passenger survey. Is it because the opinion polls of the overall population in the UK show something quite different, which is that there's overwhelming support for increased taxes on frequent flyers and premium flyers. What would you say to that?
Can we give a general answer and I'll find the UK number?
Yeah. So I think there are some polls and some media, some reaction in some countries where you may see it. So from certain angles, like in France, I think also people say that the rich should be taxed. But when you dig more, when you do more than scratching the surface, where these opinions come from, first of all, it is a minority. But to go back to your question, it is in the IATA, it is a poll, it is a global poll, so it's not just one particular country we're talking about. I think you would see, I think in some countries in Europe, the first reaction, yes, the rich pay more. But you see, if you would ask the same people, are you happy with the tax? Would you also like to contribute to say, no, we don't want the tax, we just want the rich to be taxed. So I really don't see the logic again from a taxation perspective. Does it do any good for the treasury? Is it the most effective way to tax after all? Obviously the answer is still no. So for me that's kind of a very populistic angle you see in some of the countries. And we say mainly in Europe this is what you see, but I consider this as a minority across the board.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. Yeah, I haven't got the UK number right in front of me right now, Ian, but we've been doing this survey for some time, and the UK is more or less in line with other countries that, again, agreeing with the majority that the tax is not seen as a good way to make aviation sustainable or indeed a popular measure. Thank you. Next question, please. Yes, lady in the back there. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Forum Gandhi from the Economic Times in India. I had a question about, in the slides that you mentioned, there is no mention of India. Are there any specific points which are related to India which you could highlight for us?
Do you mean on the topics I discussed?
Yes, on the recent you just mentioned about the UK bit, anything similar for that on India or any other tax related issues that are a concern for you?
Yeah. So I can say from a Middle East, African, complete perspective, and Asian perspective, taxation, when we look at the priorities we look at, taxation is almost everywhere a topic. For India specifically, I don't have the exact numbers, but maybe.
We can get back to you on specific Indian tax issues.
Yeah.
But obviously we were there in June, and I think the growth of aviation in India is obviously remarkable and very strong at the moment. So I don't think you've got any views on that.
No, it doesn't come across for us as one of the most urgent issues for us to tackle. As I say, taxation in one shape or another is present in all of the regions. I see sort of from a regional perspective, but it's not that taxation in India is sort of on top of the concerns, the worries we have. We wouldn't agree with depending on the shape and the form it's being done, but there is, in some countries we can see the logic why the taxation is there. Again, it's affecting our business, it's not a good thing to do, but on the scale of things in India it's not, as far as I know, not on top of our list of our concerns. Because there's so much growth, let's be honest.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Hello, I'm Elisa from Agência Estado Brasil. I'd like to ask a little bit more about this taxation on luggage. It's a big question in Brazil right now. A lot of criticism, so if you would talk about the impacts and things like that, please.
So on the cabin luggage, the free cabin luggage, yes. So we have a similar discussion going on in E261, so there's some similarities. I do see it in Brazil as in the context of pre-election mode. So it is one of those measures that if you see it in the press without the context, who would be against free cabin luggage? No one. Then, if you look at the realities, how are you going to make this work? Then you see where the problem comes up. Well, first of all, the consumer choice is the same in Brazil. So it's a global poll. We're doing 50 markets. Brazil was one of those markets we polled as well. You see clearly it's not a priority for the Brazilian passenger, for the majority of Brazilian passengers. That's one thing. Second thing is operationally, if they start talking about having a second, an additional free cabin luggage, for instance, actually if everyone would bring, I think, cabin luggage on board, you could see that depending on the size of it, you can see that today's aircraft are not designed for everyone to put allow cabin luggage. I'm not meaning under a seat, where it's the best safe thing, above in the bins. Thank you very much. For me, a bin is also something kind of dubious word, but in the bins. So that's another operational challenge. As a result of that, if suppose that everyone would be taking one or two cabin luggage, so would be encouraged to take more cabin luggage, you would see more delays as well. And I see it already now, not just with in Europe when flying across Europe, where you have a capacity load of 80, 84, 85%. On top of that, more and more people bringing cabin luggage. If we're going to allow more people to bring in, that's going to cause even more delays. Now, and the principle is the same. This is governments really interfering with passengers' choice, and secondly, I would say also the commercial freedom of airlines to offer free or no free cabin luggage, let alone an additional cabin luggage. So the compulsory nature of it, we have a serious problem with that. This is really not done for the reasons I explained.
Thank you, Karen, and then Kurt.
Thanks, Chris. Thomas, with wherever you look in the world, you mentioned about the difficulty of communicating all this to policymakers, lawmakers, so they understand it, and then they're changing all the time, particularly in places like Latin America, but they change all the time. So how challenging is it to both keep those, the changing people educated as to why some of these things don't work? And is this something that, I know you're heading the advocacy, if you like, this part of it, but is this something that IATA needs a bigger team for?
Thanks for the question, Karen. So first of all, I would say there's lots of great ICAO principles around. And why are they great? Because we're a global business, and these are global principles. That's one of the relevant and good guidelines that we like to use in many of the files that we are dealing with. The second thing is, you're rightly so on the educational role of IATA and my team going forward. We have an advantage in IATA, a couple of big advantages. One is that we are global, so we can compare notes. We can talk about Brazil, we can talk about what's going on in Singapore. If you look at the presentation from Marie, it's truly global. And we have expertise in all of those markets. We have the facts, we have the numbers, we have the economic analysis, all types of analysis that we can show to the regulators. So our job is to bring the rational argument, not emotionality, but the rational argument to the table to convince the regulators wherever they are based what they should be doing more and what they should be doing less. Again, it's a global industry, and if you don't get things right in one important region because of our international trade, this could well have a domino effect in other regions, and you could get it also wrong in the other regions, and you would see the effect in terms of even connectivity to that extent. So it's really important, and that's a strength of IATA, so that we can play in all of the regions, in all large markets. Do we need to do more of that? Advocacy, as we call it lobbying or advocacy, is one of the three pillars of IATA's existence. So it's always been very important, I do believe that we have global principles, global views from where I'm sitting, from my little chair here, in a global role, which is not easy, but we execute locally. So it's important to continue to have this global, I would say, credibility as IATA, which we do have, for the reasons I just mentioned. But it's equally important that we're able to execute, that we're able to listen to the local markets and also act locally. I think people call it local. So this is, I think, a continued challenge for IATA to do this. Just to finish on that, this is also why is global so important, is why we work very closely together with our regional association partners. And it's not because I used to run one, but it's the regional associations have a lot of value. National associations have a lot of value to add, also towards the politicians, of course. So this is the way we like to make it work.
Thank you. Yes, Kurt.
Yes, hello again, Kurt from ATW. You left the industry, now you came back, and you said that there was no changes, improvements on the ATC sector, especially here in Europe. Is it also related that we don't have enough, flight controllers or closed airspace where Ukraine and Russia, which creates stress on other nations like Poland, for example? What are the main challenges now? And no one talks about anymore about the single European sky, actually.
Yeah. Thanks, Kurt. We talk about CES2+, so it's still there somewhere, but it doesn't hold a lot of credibility anymore. So I guess we prefer to talk about use other terminology. But as you know very well, the capacity or lack of it continues to be a major challenge for the ATCOs and for the NSPs running the ATCOs. So there's been some improvement in some countries. It takes a long time to upskill people, to train people. Air traffic controllers, that's one thing. So I think staffing continues to be an issue, a shortage of it. And also the potential flexibility of these air traffic controllers to work across the borders. A German, someone who's employed by the DFS, the German NSP, can he or she work flexibly in France? And the answer is no, that is not possible. So staffing and the flexibility of it is one thing. The second challenge, and that goes for the entire sector, is basically further digitization. We can perfectly not only reduce the cost, the OPEX, but also increase the efficiency of the ATCOs should they accelerate the digitization of the sector. Again, there's some politics around it. I know Eurocontrol is very much has been pushing this tremendously hard in Europe. But by the way, this is also a global challenge. Digitization is really the future, I would say, also for the ATCOs. They need to make a better job of it. We as airlines are involved as much as possible in the discussions, as you know, worldwide, working with the ANSPs. We like to see them as partners, but I think they could do more to become more cost efficient, but I would say in particular more effective and offer resilient services, because by the way, we are still growing, so traffic is growing, so we urgently need to digitize the space, whether it's in Europe, whatever you call it, worldwide. That's a challenge.
And sorry, just one addendum to that. You mentioned, who's responsible. You mentioned Poland, but actually Poland is by no means the big problem here. France and Germany are responsible for more than half of all the delays. Just France and Germany.
So he knows that.
Okay. Any more questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm Kishore from the Malaysian National News Agency, Panama. So my question is, how concerning do you see the rising tax burden on airlines in Asia Pacific, and what impact does it have on the region's competitiveness?
I'm afraid I didn't catch the first part of it.
How concerning do you see the rising tax burden on airlines in Asia Pacific, and what impact does it have on the region's competitiveness?
Thank you very much for the question. So the principle is the same. So I think we need to take, if you're talking about passenger tax, ticket tax, you need to take it case by case. And as IATA, we are working across Asia to talk to the governments and to talk to some reasoning to them, and trying to come to really a balanced approach. Is there a balanced approach? Is that possible? Again, from a political perspective, I can sometimes understand why governments like to tax sectors, but they do need to do it in a very conscious way, knowing about the negative impact. Especially for, I think, for Asia, overall, it's important to keep it into account because Asia is growing fast, wants to grow fast, is very ambitious. The taxes here per passenger in Asia Pacific is roughly across $2 per passenger, American dollars per passenger, and it's actually one of the lowest which I expected. Doesn't mean that let's open the door for taxes. So I would think then that the Asian governments are thinking about this in a very rational way and want to promote growth and connectivity. So that could be actually be a good example. Now I see the average number. So we're actually quite happy then, comparing to the other numbers that we see. That's useful.
Questions? Yes, Itika, go ahead.
Yes, hello. You talked about the Chicago Convention of 1944. Yeah, that's almost 100 years ago. So how is this continued with this exception in modern times?
Yeah, so are you talking, which exception are you talking about? You're talking about
Kerosene tax.
Oh yeah, the VAT.
Mm-hmm.
The VAT. Well, the original purpose was there to increase, democratize, I would say, air traffic, and that is still very valid at principle for many regions in the world. So we're not there yet. The second thing is, as you know, when you talk about VAT, you're talking about national tax, local tax. We are still a global industry, so I don't think this is really the way to go. It would simply be impossible, apart from the fact that why yet another tax? We are taxed sufficiently enough. I think it's just not going to be workable, right? If you're specifically referring to VAT, and I would see it in the overall context of we need more connectivity, not less. Apart from the Chicago Convention itself, ICAO, of course, continues to be a very important, very good instrument because of the global nature of the industry. So I think it's not because it's an old principle that it's no longer valid. I think it's still very valid for the reasons I mentioned, to have that exemption. It is true that democratization has taken place of aviation, of flying, in markets that have been liberalized through local and regional regulations, liberalization, but certainly we're not there yet in all of the markets. And again, as I mentioned, VAT, I don't think it's logical even to think about that. I would say let's optimize connectivity and find ways to incentivize rather than constantly punish aviation.
Thank you. We've got time for one more, maybe. Oh yes, at the back. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lady Ibrahim from News 24 in South Africa. I just wanted maybe more context around, the African region and passenger tax. We know that from the previous presentations, Africa's in terms of aviation industry growth has somewhat stagnated, and net profit margins have actually somewhat decreased. So I'm just wanting your perspective on that from the impact that tax has had on it, and whether it's higher than compared to other regions, etc.
Thank you for the question. I think the challenges in Africa are more than taxation. I think it's the economic stability in many countries. So it's a whole bunch of, unfortunately, a whole bunch of blockers there. Marie talked about the lack of availability of jet fuel, just to name one. As far as the passenger tax is concerned, we're up to $15 per passenger as part of a ticket in Africa. You're sort of at the average I would say, looking at this worldwide, high average. Well, I can tell you their average is 12.6, so it's actually above the average with $14.9 per passenger per ticket. So again, it's not going to incentivize aviation on the contrary, but as I said, there are many more or other structural challenges there in the African continent in order not only to get flying, but to get flying and make some money. So I think Africa remains a large challenge for the numbers, part of the reasons that were mentioned this morning as well.
Thank you, Thomas, and thanks for your questions, everyone. We are going to be shortly breaking for lunch. Before I do that, I need to